Okay. So I think we'll just start the meeting. Welcome to the IEA webinar on the plight of women women in trade during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Akoth Joan from the Institute of Economic Affairs. I'm under the Trade and Development program responsible for holding this webinar. So for those of us who haven't interacted with the IEA before, the Institute of Economic Affairs, IEA, is a think tank which undertakes research and public education on key economic issues on public affairs in Kenya and the region generally. And we utilize the outcome of this public education and research to influence policy dialogue and the policy making process. So in this context, we are holding the webinar today on the plight of women traders during the COVID-19 pandemic. The webinar is going to dwell on two areas to get the discussion. The first area is the implications the pandemic has had on trade, especially for women who are trading in goods and trading in services as well. Then the second area of discussion will focus on the trade policy environment to give a perspective of how this impacts on women traders. So under this, we'll be looking at the measures put in place by the government to try and cushion these women in trade from the effects of the pandemic. So I'll just run us through the agenda to see what is planned out for the webinar. So first off is the introduction, which will be made by myself, Akoth Joan. Yeah. Then after the introductions, the first 10 minutes we'll have presentations. The first presentation will be made by Ms. Gloria Atuhere. Gloria, I hope I've done justice to the name, who is the head of Women and Trade Program at Trademark East Africa. Then the second presentation will be done by Ms. Rose Rono, who is the Director of Trade Facilitation at KenTrade. Each of the presentations will take 20 minutes. Then after the presentations, we will have a plenary session where we will have an interaction with the presenters and the presentations, just to give comments or seek clarification, if any, in form of questions. So we'll have a chance for that during the plenary session. Then after that, we will have a summary and closure session, which will take about 10 minutes. So the plenary session and the summary and closure will be done by John Mutua, who is a programs coordinator at the IEA. So that's the agenda in summary. So I'll just go straight into the introductions, since they're being done by myself, to just set up a context of how why we think the topic is important and how we settled on the two areas of focus, which is of course the implications of the pandemic to women who are trading in services and goods, as well as policy environment perspective, just to see what the measures the government has put in place to cushion the women who are trading both in goods and services. So to try and set a context, generally we've always known that women traditionally have been given the role of being the primary caregivers at home. This largely by society and also just by default, by virtue of the fact that we carry out most of the primary caregiving activities. So over time, they have also acquired the role of being income earners in the professional, economic and business space. So as the pandemic hit, we have seen women get required to give more time or there's a greater care demand at home. So this means that their businesses, if at all they're practicing trade or any other type of business, will be disproportionately affected during this time, since they are spending less time doing business as a result of them spending more time caregiving at home. So we have also seen that during this pandemic, many governments, Kenya included, calling for lockdowns and economic stoppages, putting women at a relatively higher risk of losing their jobs, since most of them are concentrated in the most labor-intensive, low-income sectors of the economy, like manufacturing, you've seen tourism, informal cross-border trade, which is largely practiced by women, and other petty services. So these sectors that I've mentioned above have been most exposed to suffering from economic restrictions, such as the lockdown. We have seen international travel bans, international trade and global value chain restrictions, which have adversely affected where women are predominantly working. So with these women making up, it's estimated about 70% of cross-border traders in Africa, the border closures as a result of the pandemic and the control measures means that their activity or their economic activity is limited, and their incomes are also severely affected as a result of the limited economic activity and as a consequence of the border closure. They also depend during their businesses or their trading activities. They depend on public space and social interactions mostly, especially when trading and selling, which are now being very restricted to contain the spread of the pandemic. So this, of course, affects their livelihood and their way of earning a living. Regionally, just to try and give a context, there is a significant amount of cross-border trade that goes on within the East African community, which is primarily carried out by women traders, as I mentioned before. So reports are indicating currently that trade declined by more than 50% just at the regional level, and the country level for Kenya, it's they're quoting about 60%. So we know that since about 70% of those practicing cross-border trade are women, the impact hits them the hardest, just by virtue of the fact that they're the larger population practicing cross-border trade. So this is also coupled by other factors, like the fact that women tend to operate in the informal sector, hence they are not protected by insurance, or they are not eligible to any government scheme aimed at people who are practicing businesses. So they end up gaining credit facilities, or formal employees who end up benefiting in terms of wage subsidies or such like measures. So all these factors that I've mentioned above mean that women are affected differently by the pandemic than men. So it means that they require a different set of interventions during the pandemic, just to ensure that they are cushioned and the impact is not as hard as it is on women, or that they're being treated the same way as men, since we know that they experience different challenges, or their challenges are experienced at a different level, or a higher level than men. So to help us delve into the conversation and just explore these two areas of focus are our speakers, whom I already introduced before, Ms. Gloria Tuherwe, Head of Women and Trade Program, Trademark East Africa, who will go first and help us understand the effects of COVID-19 to women who are trading in goods and services. So welcome, Ms. Gloria.
Thank you, Joan, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be on this call today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joan. Can you hear me? Joan, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much.
Gloria, are you there?
Economic. Yes, Joan, can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you, Gloria, but I think Joan can't hear you.
Okay.
I think Gloria can just go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Gloria Tuhere. I'm the Director for Women in Trade program at Trademark East Africa. So just want to thank IEA for the opportunity to share this webinar as part of a series that we've been hosting. So the nature of my presentation, I'll of course give a very brief overview about Trademark, and then share a few of what's happening on the global scene as relates to trade in general, but then also women in trade. And then I'll zero in East Africa, the region where we work, with a focus primarily on women in cross-border trade, and that obviously would be primarily trade in goods. So that will be the structure of my presentation this afternoon. So for those who might not be very familiar with Trademark East Africa, Trademark is an aid for trade organization that seeks to increase trade and promote sustainable and inclusive prosperity through trade. We are working in East African community, but also in the DRC, Somaliland, Ethiopia, and soon Malawi and Mozambique. And we do this through two ways. One area is to look at the reduction of barriers to trade, and the other area is to increase business competitiveness, which is primarily the response of the private sector to the different trade facilitation initiatives that we do. And the program that I lead, Women in Trade program, sits under the outcome area 2, which is in business competitiveness, basically ensuring that the gains from trade are inclusive, are contribute to the reduction in the gender inequalities that we see in different aspects of trade. And so this is really what the program is about in Trademark East Africa, trying to grow prosperity in the region through trade. So going to the topic more about what we're discussing today, I think we're all familiar that there's been a huge impact on our economies as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and trade has in many ways declined, although I think lately we've been seeing upward trends. But a lot of the data I'm referring to is between Jan and May, so probably the first half of this year, 2020, and the kind of trends that we saw across the region. So primarily there's been a reduction in both imports and exports in and out of the region in East Africa, but of course the country is in the hinterland, the landlocked countries of Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi definitely, and DRC were more affected than
Sorry,
Kenya.
Gloria, do you mind sharing the slides?
Joan, I'm sharing my screen. I think other people can see it. Anne, can you see it?
Joan.
Sorry, I can't see the screen, but maybe Rose can go off on video.
So no one can see the screen?
Hi, Rose. Kindly turn off the video. Okay, thank you. Please try sharing again, Gloria. Sorry about that.
Can you see it now?
Yes,
We
can see it. Please proceed.
Okay. Sorry, apologies. I assumed So I don't know if I should go back or just proceed from where I was.
I think just proceed from where you are.
Okay, just basically given a brief intro about Trademark East Africa and what we do and the kind of status globally. I mean, this is East Africa in trade. So I wanted to take us back a bit to the tourism sector at the global level. This is an analysis done by the WTO between Jan and March. And again, we can see a significant decline in tourist arrivals. Of course, Africa has seen almost a 13% decline. And I guess that would definitely have an implication on East Africa as well. If we look at if we look at the imports across the region between January and March, again, the red shows January, green is Feb, and blue is March. So you can see across the different countries, whether it's Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, there's been a steady decline in imports across the region, and it's showing the different modes of whether it's rail or road, but overall we've seen a decline in imports across the EAC. This is the export. Again, Jan is red, marked in red, February is green, and March is blue. Across Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC. Sorry, the other figures are really small. But if you look at the first two, which is Kenya and Uganda, Uganda is kind of showing almost a steady growth, whereas Kenya has also had a marked increase in March, which I think we attribute towards the opening up of the cargo and particularly in the horticulture sector. So this is just a snapshot showing the cross-border traffic, the trucks. Elegu is the border between Uganda and South Sudan, and Miramba Hills is the border between Uganda and Rwanda. So again, the blue shows trucks, import trucks. So those are trucks get into Uganda, and then the orange brown shows the trucks getting out into South Sudan. And again, a bit of fluctuation. And of course, Miramba Hills has, in a way, has experienced quite significant reduction in terms of the traffic flows at that border between January and March. Just to highlight the issues around the transport corridor, I think we've been seeing a lot of this in the news. Challenges at the border crossings, even up till I think this week or last week, Malaba was having similar scenarios where people get a long hold up of trucks at the border, and this is primarily to do with the processing, particularly the health checks that are now required, of course, in response to the pandemic. Checking, testing of drivers and other compliance issues before there's clearance at the border. So there's been quite a number of challenges in this regard, but happy to share that yesterday, was the day before yesterday, Trademark East Africa launched a driver's app that will help, at least in terms of having a digital record of the driver's COVID status, their tests and all that, which will help to reduce some of these delays, because then drivers can get clearance quite fast and be able to cross on the other side of the border. So one of the challenges, of course, in these delays is the issue of, the deterioration of the commodities that they're carrying, depending on what's being transported. And particularly, we'll see later on in this presentation the impact this has had on the smaller and informal cross-border traders. So this is a study that was done by UNECA, again early this year, And they were looking across the region to see, in terms of business across, for both goods and services, the kind of challenges that have been faced in the region. So, of course, we have been seeing a lot of business closure. If you look at the column on goods, a lot of business closure, slowdown, or cut issues in cash flow, demand, obviously, because for various reasons, some people have been laid off, they've lost their jobs. People are, of course, prioritizing the kind of things that they use the money for, So that's the kind of trends we're seeing in the goods sector. In services, similar challenges, maybe not exactly ranked the same way, but the same issues: operational cash flow, drops in demand, inability to meet new customers and access new markets, complete business closure. They need to adapt, because many businesses have had either to completely change their business models or to get into new product lines. So a lot of businesses have been forced to be able to adapt to the new normal, as we're calling it now. Of course, there's a whole scenario of people having to work from home, where it's applicable, but there are also cases where definitely there's been complete redundancies as a result of the pandemic. So then this looks at the challenges across the scale, how micro, small versus medium and large business have been affected across the board. So the challenges are similar, but of course the impact, depending on the scale of business, is different. So if we look at the small businesses, cash flow is an issue, closure second, and then the issue of market access and accessing new customers is a challenge. Whereas on the medium scale, for medium-sized businesses, the immediate first challenge that was recorded was actually closure, followed by a drop in demand in product and services, and then the reduction in meeting new clients or accessing new markets. So this shows us that at different levels of the pyramid or the scale, the challenges differ. So taking us now into the issue that is really what my presentation is about, which is about women in trade. If we take us just a global look at what's happening, this is a study done by the World Bank that has shown basically that COVID-19 has really, we've already known of the existing inequalities, the vulnerability of women, but this pandemic, I think, has brought that to the fore even more now than ever, how deep-rooted some of these inequalities are. And so this study shows that female-owned businesses are about 5 or 6 times more likely to close during this pandemic as compared to male-owned business. And the next point touches on what Joanne mentioned earlier. The kind of industries that most women are in, again, have faced mass closure. So industries like hospitality, hotels, cafes. Of course, the education sector has ground to a halt in many of our countries. Childcare, wellness, grooming. So many women are employed in these sectors, and these are the sectors that have been most hit by the pandemic, many of which have faced a significant closure. But there's also the issue, again, that Joanne touched on in her introduction, which is the issue of childcare. So this study shows that women are spending 6 more hours in a day compared to their male counterparts in home care, in homeschooling, taking care of people at home, taking care of the elderly. So the burden on women during this time has increased in that sense, especially in the area of childcare. So I just want to highlight, this is a study that Trademark has done. It's actually an ongoing study. This was looking now at women cross-border traders. We sampled about 260 women cross-border traders, just to figure out the kind of challenges that they have faced or are facing since the since the pandemic and the subsequent restrictive, the restrictions put in place by governments across the region. So the issue of the border closure obviously comes out as number one, because these are women who make a living through crossing the borders. That's really what they do. So the closure of borders, the restriction on movement has really had an adverse effect on many of these women traders, with many of them, of course, having their businesses totally eroded, big challenge around obligations, because again, most of these traders are informal, they're small, so it's like a day-to-day kind of business. So what you get in today is what you plow back tomorrow. So if you want to scale up at any one point, you have to usually borrow from their small circles or cooperatives, or even some borrow from banks that are in the area. So the issue of loan obligations has come out quite significantly. And if you look at Uganda, Kenya, the challenges are not very different, but obviously because Uganda, some commodities usually are consumed primarily in Kenya. It's a big market, and so the traders in Uganda have been hit more in comparison to the traders in Kenya. This shows the impact on COVID. Profits, totally being wiped out, literally, if you look at across, whether it's Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, DRC, on average, most of these businesses or traders have really lost almost 90 or even 100% of their revenue from trade. If you look at the period before COVID, where people are, on average, on daily profits ranging between $100, even up till $1,000, and that has totally been eroded in the last few months. This was now zooming in a little bit more at the Busia border, looking at Busia on the Uganda side and Busia, Kenya. So the first graph is in Uganda shillings, but again comparing the kind of incomes these women were recording or profits in January, which is about 300,000 Uganda shillings, compared to March, again, which is almost non-existent. In Kenya, from an average of about 5,000 Kenya shillings down to close to 1,000 in March. So this just gives us a scenario. So the scenario at the borders really is a representation of the scenario across the countries. They're not very variant in that sense. One of the challenges that has come up as a result of, at least at the borders, as a result of the restrictive measures at the border and the fact that people can't cross, of course, is the increase in use of what we call pioneer routes or the informal routes. So people are not able to use the formal border crossing, but I mean, this is their livelihood. So they then use pioneer routes. And in this case, this is Malaba. It's a river. So we see women, floating across. The consignment is also taken across. Of course, they have to pay for this tax, but the risk is really immense. We've had various stories of people, of course, their consignment being washed away. But even we had a scenario, I think in April, where actually one of the ladies was washed away by the tide. So this is the kind of risk and exposure that these women are facing as a result of the border closure. I wanted to just highlight this, speaking to the slide, the issue I raised earlier around loans. So out of the 200 and so women that were interviewed, 70% of these had a loan, have a loan somewhere. It could be with microfinance, it could be their small cooperative. Some actually have even with the banks. So if 90% of their income has been eroded, if not 100, and yet 70% of them have loan obligations, obviously we see that there's really a dire situation there, because not only are they faced with no incomes, but now they also have debt that's really choking them. So that's one of the big concerns that has come through. I wanted to share two scenarios that happened as recently as I think this was May. The first one is around a group of women, a cluster of women who trade in eggs at the Busia border. It's a group of about 40 different women traders who've come together to trade in eggs. So now they had just, I think it's about March, they had, of course, they source from different places, consolidate, and then bring over there from Uganda to Kenya. So just before they could do that, then the ban came into place. They were not able to cross the border. So this particular group, they had stock worth about 25 million Uganda shilling, which is about $6,000 or $7,000. And literally, they lost all this. They lost about 70% of their stock. And one of the challenges that has been in place is because with the restrictions and, of course, the protocols that have been put in place, it's only big cargo trucks that are allowed to cross the border. So ordinarily, these eggs would move on a hand truck, on a hand cart, rather. Sometimes they just do a border, doing various trips across the border. So they don't have the kind of volume that they could actually put into a truck. Besides, the cost of the trucks has also gone up because of the cost the drivers have to meet in all the COVID testing and sanitizing of their trucks. So that cost obviously is transferred to the women traders. For example, we had in a place like Elegu, just to hire a truck from Elegu which is on the Uganda side, to Nimule, which is on the South Sudan side, which is a distance of not more than a kilometer. Truck drivers were asking for as much as $100. So obviously, it's not something any small trader would be able to afford. So they are not able to get to consolidate enough to be able to get a truck across. The second scenario was, I think, in May, and many of you could have seen this in the papers, where there was a ban, an export ban from the Kenya authorities, where they're not allowing sugarcane to come from Uganda coming into Kenya. Again, one of the scenarios we had here was a lady who, after being hit, of course, in March, had then been able to collect her savings and then get into the sugarcane trade because they knew that was coming through. So she is able to get, stock worth 10 million Uganda shillings. And unfortunately, then the ban was just a sudden ban that came up, and all the trucks were stopped from crossing into Kenya. So this trader lost, stock worth almost $3,000. So this is just kind of trying to highlight the different scenarios that have been faced by these women as they try, to make a living, to bounce back. But, it's like there's always one thing after the other. This is a scenario in Kasarani. So as we all know, even as we witness in our day-to-day living, whether we're in Nairobi or elsewhere, markets are traditionally really crowded spaces. Crowded, not very well structured, usually very simple structures in place. So of course now when the pandemic came with the required protocols, the markets were also required, obviously, to comply. So you were required to have, that social distancing, the sanitation facilities available, which most of these markets don't have. So what happened is that many of the women who are working in Kasarani, which is a market at the Busia, close to the Busia border, were displaced. Their stores were demolished. They were told to move out of that place because they weren't being compliant. But the issue is where do they go? So one of the issues that has been coming up a lot, and not just in Kenya but across the region, is because the size of the markets is small. Many of them are not really built, to adhere to the kind of requirements that are expected now. So many traders are being displaced, and they have to find a way, either small out in the villages, or some of them totally put out of work. So this is another challenge that is coming up in terms of even access to a physical location where the buyers and sellers can meet is increasingly becoming a challenge. The same thing happened in Taveta. A market, I think, was demolished market stalls, not the market, pardon me, but a few market stalls where a lot of the women have been using were also demolished. One of the scenarios that is again, quite evident across the board is the issue of increase in sexual and gender-based violence, both for those in the trading activity, but also more so at the household level. So this is just a story of a lady in Uganda who, again, just like anybody else, was trying to make a living, and so they've been using illegal routes. Unfortunately for her, this particular morning, with just a small consignment of tomatoes, fell into the, she was unfortunately assaulted by 3 men, losing all her goods, the whole trauma. She runs for help. But the thing that stood out for me in this story that speaks to, of course, the cultural and social dynamics in our communities is that she was too scared to file a case to the police because of the stigma attached to that, and because she was afraid that if her husband got to know, that would end in divorce. So that was the end of that story, unfortunately, because of course, even if you're offering help to somebody, she has to be willing to provide the information, and she wasn't. And this is a scenario that many millions of women face, that in the end they suffer in silence because of the stigma that comes with it. Again, a few of the voices that came through during this survey, the things that the women, the expressions from the women that I thought would be very good to share in this forum. One of them says, we no longer save. It's just about getting food on the table. We're like birds, we don't store anything. Another one says it's become frustrating when there's no food. We tend to fight over things as basic as salt. Then the issue, of course, of increased teenage pregnancy that has also come by because kids are not in school. One of the ladies from Uganda said that children are being lowered into sex just for you to access something as small as a chapati, which is almost 27 cents worth, or Uganda shillings, 1,000 Uganda shillings. Then the issue of sex work has also come up again. There are some women who have come out of this trade, but as a result of the fact that their businesses have shut down, many more have reverted back to the commercial sex work, in particular because of the delays that at the border and a lot of truck drivers hanging around the border area. Women are going in there just to be able to get money for rent or other supplies, which exposes them not just to HIV probably, but also even to coronavirus itself, because they're exposed. So I'll end my presentation by talking about, I think, the opportunity. What can we do? I think the scenario is still ever changing, the scene around us, but I think there's opportunities that come and lessons, obviously, for us who are in development work, a lot of lessons that come through. So the issue of resilience, obviously, is the issue at hand, not just for Trademark as a program, but I think across the board. Even governments have been thinking this through and saying, okay, how do we build resilience? How do we help businesses to bounce back? So that's a discussion that's ongoing. As a program, obviously, that's really squarely what we're looking at, to see how we can help these traders, whether today it's a pandemic, tomorrow it may be something else, but are they able to, be able to weather some of the shocks that come our way? A lot of what we've been doing is around advocacy and dialogue, so close to what we are having today, just discussions with technical people, with policymakers, with private businesses, trying to figure out, okay, what does the solution look like and how severe is this problem? Because I think to some extent, some things are obvious to us today, but I think the consequences of this pandemic will keep, being unraveled in the months to come. So there will also be need for continuous data analysis, research to figure this whole thing out and to figure out, how it can be addressed. From Trademark perspective, we've come up with a program that we call the Safe Trade Emergency Response, and this was really a new funding line from different donors to basically help the region to tide over, to keep trade going as possible, even during this time. So I won't get into the details of that safe trade facility, but just to say that it's looking at different aspects. It's looking at aspects, of course, of health and safety from the dynamic of, from the perspective of provision of PPEs, either for the border officials, anybody who's on the front line in the trade space, and ensuring that they're able to have protection. We're also looking at issues of the disruption in supply chains and how some of those chains can be helped to bounce back. We're seeing horticulture is really picking up again. Another area is looking at the issue of standards and harmonization across the region, because there's a real risk, amongst others, of transmission of the virus even through food, and the food essential, what is considered an essential commodity currently. So what is the exposure there, and how can that be mitigated? Looking at issues, of course, of advocacy dialogue. A lot of these issues, like I said, about the sugarcane ban, many of these issues are resolved through dialogue. The East Africa Business Council and other private sector bodies are continuously engaged in this discourse to enable businesses to, keep in operation, or to get back on track. Technology is a big thing, not just for trademark, but I think for all of us. I think now more than ever, we realize the necessity of digital solutions. And so a lot of the work we're doing is going to focus on this, trying to get information out to the women traders, trying to build digital presence. About a month ago, Trademark had, in partnership with Facebook, run a training for women SMEs, and we're going to continue doing a lot of these just to get women, get their businesses in the digital space and be able to access buyers or to access their inputs or whatever supplies they require without necessarily physical interaction, as may have been the case. We also want to leverage technology, of course, in trying to get information out there in terms of trading information, but also in terms of market information, what's on demand, what is required. One of the things that came up during the lockdown was the issue of, I mentioned the issue of trucks, but I'll give you another example. At the DRC border, which is a big importer of fish from the rest of East Africa. But without having these consignments in a refrigerated truck, you cannot get through. Although ordinarily, this fish was being moved in open, smaller trucks. But due to the new restrictions, you have to have a refrigerated truck. Obviously, many of these women could not afford that. They could not access that. And so that whole supply chain has almost come to a halt. But maybe if they were able to connect some of these with each other, or to connect them to a logistics provider, who knows, maybe they would not lose some of these opportunities because they're able to access the information in time. So those are some of the digital solutions we're trying to come up in response to this pandemic. And then lastly is the issue of networks, which in a way is related to the digital scenario, but networks and cooperatives. One of the things that came out very evidently is just the power of networks, and not just for small and micro traders, but even for the big scale traders. Because at the end of the day, people had to find options quickly, and that's just the power of networks. For the smaller scale traders, the cooperative has provided a safety net. We've had cases, particularly in Rwanda, which has a very well-structured cooperative system, where the cooperatives came in to bail out their members in just providing supplies in terms of food and medicine, which some of their members were not able to access because they were not, actively engaged in trade. So more and more, we're seeing the power of these networks, the power of cooperatives, and as an institution, we're going to invest heavily in some of these, in the creation or the strengthening of these cooperatives, because we know now more than ever that it's not just a solution or a model to build economic value of trade, but it also provides that social net, safety net, and that cohesion that has been one of the things that many people have needed during this period of the lockdown. So I think I'll end my presentation here. Thank you all very much, and just looking forward to the question and interactive session after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for that brilliant presentation. Before I go into the summary, just to remind us that there's a chat box that can help us interact with the presenters. So you can post your questions there on the chat box. And I'm also encouraging the presenters just to peruse through and see if there's any question that has been addressed to you, then we can discuss that during the plenary session. So once again, thank you very much, Gloria, for that brilliant presentation. She took us through the plight of women traders, those who are actively trading in goods and services as well. So from the presentation, we note that generally there's been a huge impact in the economy, with trade having declined in very many areas. We see tourism having recorded a decline in trade. We note 13%. At the regional level, the EAC imports have experienced a decline, as well as exports as well in the region. So other challenges as a result of the pandemic, we note delays in clearance of goods and customs, paperwork due to diminished workforce as a result of obviously more people being encouraged to work from home. So this reduces the workforce. We also note at the continental level, or generally, businesses have been closed. We have seen people lacking operational cash flow, a drop in demand of goods and services, and so many other areas that have also been affected. Specifically for women, the challenges we are seeing across, the example given was Uganda and Kenya, so most of these are similar. We see border closures, we see restrictions of movement. Of course, this hinders the women who used to trade maybe from Kenya exporting to Uganda. The restriction in movement, it's causing them huge losses in businesses, since they can't continue moving their goods across the borders. We see, of course, diminishing clients. If you are a trader in Kenya, depending on traders in Uganda, and you can't move anymore. So that means you only depend on traders from the Kenyan side, and vice versa for those who are trading in Uganda. We've also seen some traders dying. So there's the issue of death as well. So if you had a supplier who succumbed as a result of COVID-19, definitely that means you have to find a new supplier, which interferes with the trade process. So like Gloria had mentioned, we see that 70% of these women who are actively participating in trade have loan obligations. So as a result of the losses they're experiencing during this pandemic, we've seen most of them are not able to pay back their loans. So the other example was the export ban, which, like I mentioned earlier, has caused women traders, very huge losses. We were given an example of a woman who had stocked very many eggs worth so many dollars just before the ban, but then they could not export after the ban was effected. So this led to very huge losses, and some of them ended up losing almost 100% of their stock. We also see an increase, this is a new perspective, an increase in sexual, maybe not new, in sexual and gender-based violence for those women who are involved in trading activities. So this has always been there, of course, but as a result of the border closures, more women tend to look for the Panya route, or they tend to trade through the porous borders. So it increases the number of women who are exposed to the danger of sexual violence as a result of trying to find the panya routes to continue trading so that they can sustain themselves. So we also see opportunities that have been identified from the presentation. We note the need to rebuild traders' resilience through advocacy to offer long-term solutions beyond the pandemic, because like mentioned, it's not going to be the end of these challenges and pandemics. So we might as well need look for a long-term solution if we are trying to solve the traders' problems. So there's also the need for continuous data analysis and research. Of course, this is a new pandemic, so more research and data analysis is required just to shed light on how maybe we can improve the situation or probably curb some of the economic effects that are being felt as a result of the pandemic. There's also the need to leverage on technology, digital trade more and more. We see the necessity of digital solutions being applied because people are being discouraged to trade physically. So more and more the need for more traders to take advantage of the digital trade side of the solution. So we know that women are not very well educated. They do not have enough information as far as the opportunities available for digital trade. So just the need to create more awareness and education on the available opportunities that women can take advantage of and begin trading more on the digital platform. So those are the things I noted from the presentation. Thank you very, very much. So we'll move on to the next presentation before moving to the plenary session. So for that I will welcome Ms. Rose Rono, who is the Director of Trade Facilitation, Ken Trade, to take us through the policy environment and just show how this has either contributed towards reducing the effects of the pandemic to women who are trading in goods and services, or how maybe the policy environment has exacerbated the challenges being faced by women during this pandemic. Welcome, Rose.
Thank you very much, Joan. Allow me to project my screen and then I can start my presentation. I don't know if you can be able to see my screen now.
Yes, Rose, we can see the screen.
Okay. So thank you very much for this invitation to add on to this discussion about the plight of women traders during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll just be providing an overview of the challenges. So I might repeat a bit of what Gloria has said, but also mention some of the interventions that the government has put in place, and possibly also explore some of other recommendations that are not in place or proposals that are not in place but could be adopted to ensure that these women traders or women traders are assisted during this difficult time of the pandemic. So I'll just start by just setting the platform. This year would have marks 25 years since we went to Beijing, and I remember Beijing used to be the butt of the joke. You know, there was a lot of joke about Beijing for quite some time, and this was basically resistance from adopting gender equality. But with the 25 years that have passed, a lot has happened. There's been a lot of improvement in terms of gender equality, women empowerment, to the point of even now there are complaints. I think in our country, Kenya, now we are having complaints where when you walk into a university class, you're seeing more women than men. You walk into institutions, you're seeing almost equal representation in terms of both genders. So there's been a lot of progress since Beijing. However, this pandemic now threatens to roll back some of those progress or some of those initiatives that have brought us to this area, to this level where we are today as a people, and especially for women. So the pandemic has brought about, the inequalities, and it's shown us that despite this progress, despite what we have done, there still exists a lot of vulnerabilities, especially for women in terms of social, political, and economical systems. And business women or women traders have hugely been affected by this pandemic, with some of them having to close their businesses. And I'll just go by take you through some of the general challenges women have been having, not specifically traders, but women have been having during this pandemic. Women and girls, they generally earn less, so they are ending up saving less. The kind of jobs they hold are not very secure, and you'll find that poverty affects women much more than it affects men. And even though the statistics of COVID show that more men die from the pandemic as opposed to women, this has impacted the allocation of resources and priorities, because now you're seeing that women are spending much more, because they're spending much more on taking care of their families. Also, the issue of unpaid care, which Gloria talked about, has increased, because now with children being out of school, you find women now having to leave their jobs or leave their businesses to stay at home and take care of children, also taking care of maybe older people, and even the people who are unwell. Traditionally in African culture, it's women who take care of the sick. So these are some of the challenges that women are experiencing. Gender-based violence, those of us who have seen in the news, this has increased, because you're used to not staying with your spouse in the house all the time, but now with the stay at home and with some of the measures that have been taken, it has exacerbated the gender violence, and this mostly, you see, those who are affected are mostly women. Also, most of women are in labor-intensive, low-income sectors, and these are the sectors that have mostly been affected by the pandemic. Tourism, hotels have been closed, cross-border trade, borders were closed, even those who are working as, home managers, you will find that families are choosing, to release them because of the risk of the pandemic, or even their income can no longer afford for them to support a home manager. So specifically for women traders, research has been, the World Bank did some research which shows that 58% of women in Africa make up 58% of those the self-employed population. So you can already see self-employment means these are women traders, and this is a really, really big chunk. It's actually more than men. So the challenges that they experience really need to be looked at. And in terms of the specific challenges, Gloria brought out quite a number of them. The lockdowns and the economic stoppages have affected women, and some have closed their businesses due to low demand of their products, maybe not having somebody to leave their children with. Some of them were relying on global value chains. They are relying on sourcing their goods from China, from other places, and temporarily these were not available for some time, and it affected their businesses. Also, the reallocation of income expenditure. There are women traders out there who are in sectors which are considered at this point were considered luxury, like hospitality, beauty, clothing. They're really affected because incomes were allocated to priority areas like health and food, as opposed to these areas which are considered luxury. Also, the closure of borders, I cannot overemphasize that. 75% of cross-border traders in Africa are women. And with border closures, then we are seeing that these women are losing their livelihoods. and some are choosing to use even those illegal routes, which lead them to spending much more and also risking losing their lives. We've also seen lenders and banks being a bit more selective when it comes to lending. They are stricter in terms of their lending practices, and a lot of these women, as Gloria said in her research, that a lot of these women have loans. So with stricter lending practices, then you're seeing women businesses ultimately are being affected. So some of the government interventions that have been done specifically on this pandemic, and you can see as government was not prepared for this pandemic. We didn't think that it would get to us. So, but there were interventions nevertheless that were put in place to assist the economy overall. And a lot of these interventions also benefit women traders. So I'll take you through these. However, there are specific interventions that I'm also proposing later in the next slides that I'm going to have that will specifically focus on women traders. And some of the government interventions that have been put in place is the reduction of corporate tax and maximum individual tax rate from 30% to 25%, the reduction of VAT from 16% to 14%, individual earnings of up to 24% are getting now relieved. They are relieved from paying taxes. Turnover tax, has been reduced to 1%. Also, and all these, if you look at women businesses, they are mostly SMEs, and this mostly apply to them. The turnover tax, the individual, the returns and the salaries which are lower. So there's been quite a relief with these interventions that the government has put in place. Also, settlement of verified pending bills, which were amounting to 13 billion, some of which were due to women businesses. So the directive that was given by the president to ensure that government agencies, departments, and ministries who have these pending bills are paying them has really assisted to return cash flow, because if you've supplied to the government, you have offered a service, and you're not being paid for years, then that can risk you closing your business. Also, flexible provisions on requirements for banks in relation to loans that were performing in March when the pandemic hit Kenya. So just directive to banks to ensure that they are having a flexible approach to defaulters as a result of the pandemic. And also the government reduced the central bank rate from 8.2% to 7.25%, and the cash ratio reserve from 5.25% to 4.25%. And essentially now this gives the banks advantage or gives banks more money to be able to lend out there to assist businesses who are in distress as a result of the pandemic. Also, the cash transfers, the 10 billion cash transfers to elderly, orphans, and those vulnerable in society, and this includes women. Also, temporary suspension of being listed in the CRB. This was very notorious, and you see a lot of government agencies or businesses would probably demand, as part of the mandatory documentation to do business, would be a credit reference report, or even in terms of lending to banks would want to look at your credit reference, and probably you will not get that facility as a result of that. So that temporary suspension by the government also has enabled continuous business. Also, expedition of the returns, VAT refund claims. Also, that directive or intervention really assisted to ensure that those refunds avail cash to business. Also, the automation of international trade processes. Specifically, I work for KenTrade, and for KenTrade, we do trade facilitation. So the automation, we have automated the international trade process. It is not fully automated, but we can say the World Bank approximated the automation of the international trade process to being approximately 87%, which is an improvement of automation of around 18% back in 2013. So we cannot say that we are 100% automated, but we are working towards that. And we've been getting quite a bit of assistance from Trademark East Africa in terms of funding for automation of this government process. So it is gradual. I know a lot of traders have complained of lack of facilitation, especially during that time when the pandemic hit Kenya. We were not having, government agencies were not having enough staff, to approve permits, to ensure that goods have cleared. But with the automation process that is ongoing, we are going to see an international trading space which is more contact and more automated, whereby there's less intervention. Also, one of the other interventions that the government have put in place is the budget allocation of this financial year of 2020-2021 of 56.6 million specifically, which is 0.5% of the GDP, as an economic stimulus package to include new youth employment schemes, provision of credit guarantees, and basically just supporting businesses in the economy. So those are some of the government interventions that were put in place, but I would say that those are not enough. More needs to be done. There is a national policy on gender and development, which was done in 2019. So the implementation, full implementation of that needs to be done to ensure that we are looking at empowering women through this the provisions that are there in the policy, and looking at women not as looking at implementations and looking at government policies through the gender lens, whereby you're not treating both genders as equally, yet there is a gender that is more disadvantaged in terms of opportunities. Also, ensuring women equal representation in all COVID-19 response planning and decision making. That's one thing that really needs we need to do. Also, driving transformative change for equality by addressing the care economy, paid and unpaid. And this is basically the issue of childcare, whereby women are doing a lot of work, but they are not recognized for this work that they do. And also, when you're looking at those home managers in terms of what people are paying them, you find some of them are paid as low as 3,000 shillings, and those are some of the issues that need to be reinforced. Even if there's a minimum wage, you're finding that on the ground, it's not being reflected, it's not being reinforced. People are paying less than the minimum wage. And basically gender awareness policy making, just to ensure that any policies that are being made are being made with a gender lens, and also planning for future public health emergencies. This was something that happened, COVID happened, and we were not prepared for it. So planning for this future public health emergencies with a recognition of the different needs that both men and women need. Also, putting cash in women's hands by providing affordable loans. The cash transfer for the elderly were there, but specifically they haven't been much cash, apart from the interventions that were put in place to make sure that credit is affordable. In my research, I saw in the US, we have programs, a specific program called Paycheck Protection Program, which is specifically aimed at giving loans to small businesses to cover them during such a pandemic. So those are some of the considerations. In terms of skilling or capacity building for women traders is also an area that I think we need to look at as government institutions. Also, the use of those national social protection programs, introduction of measures to alleviate the tax burden on women, specifically maybe looking at what tax burden or what tax incentives can you give to businesses that are owned. Right now, what the incentives we have are blanket for everybody, but the challenges that women have, then it would be a good thing to look at what incentives that can be given in terms of tax for women. Then also using of networks and civil society organizations, including microfinance, savings groups, to communicate benefits and to communicate, basically using forums that women are in to communicate policies that the government is putting in place, because the government has very wonderful policies, has a lot of things that it can offer, but some of the times we do not have we do not use the right forums to communicate this. We do not communicate to the target audience. So you find that the uptake for these programs or these policy interventions is not that good. And I can give an example of the 30% allocation of all government procurements in government institutions is supposed to go to women and persons with disability. But when you look at the uptake of this, the uptake is very low. In the organization where I work with, Kentrade, we really struggle to get that 30%. We are not, when we put out tenders there, we're not getting a lot of women coming on to take it up, despite that having been specifically allocated to them. Also, integrating agenda assessment in all country assessments to understand the impact of COVID on women and girls. And I'm happy to have received that research that Trademark has done. If it could be shared to us, then we can be able to see or even share with other government institutions to see how they can be able to put interventions in place to assist specifically women traders. So sometimes we look at it from the point of view of what the government can do and only. So I have a slide here to just get us to think, what can women traders do? What can you do for yourself? It's not good to just wait for things to be done to you, for you. So some of the ideas that randomly I just came up with is innovation and embracing new business practices. A lot of businesses are dying now because of traditional business practices that were there, whereby you're waiting for somebody to come to your kiosk, or you're waiting for somebody to come to your business premises. So with innovation and embracing of new business models, like, offering your goods or services online, will help women traders to survive this pandemic. Also taking advantage of training opportunities and funding by government and development partners for businesses. A lot of this has been going around. I received quite a number of them on WhatsApp, and I try to share to those women groups. We have development partners coming up with an initiative to incubate, businesses, and you can see a lot of them are giving priority to women. Some of them are also giving funding. So some of these things, we received them on our WhatsApp groups, but it's now you to take the initiative to apply for it. You to take the initiative to go forth and say, I'm interested in it. Also, formalization of businesses. A lot of women, we do our side hustles, and you find that you don't formalize your business. But when it comes now to grow your business, you'll find that you want to supply something somewhere, and somebody is asking you for a certificate of incorporation, which you do not have. And when you don't have, you lose that opportunity. Also, joining of lobby groups. It's important that women traders join these lobby groups to ensure that their voices are heard and hold government to account. And I know government institutions and ministries and departments really like to engage through the lobby groups, to just listen to what people are saying. Government cannot come to you specific one person. So it's important that as women traders, they join lobby groups and their voices will be better heard. Also taking advantage of business opportunities that have been presented by the pandemic. There are people who have become, COVID millionaires because of taking advantage of this opportunity. people who transform their business very fast to manufacture sanitizers. They transform their business to do masks and all that was required, during this pandemic. So, and we're still in the middle of this pandemic, so there is an opportunity to take advantage of those business opportunities that present. Utilization of technology, I've talked about that. In terms of the value chains, the global value chains have been affected, and now probably it would be important to look at the regional value chains. Can we substitute what we normally get from China, from other places, to our regional value chains? For example, in the East Africa community, our neighboring countries, or even locally, what can you substitute as opposed to just relying on global value chains that might be affected by this pandemic for some time? And also diversification from the traditional women sectors. They are very traditional sectors that us women are in, like agriculture, care, and diversifying to more resilient sectors like health, manufacturing, product addition, not being at the bottom of the value chain, uplifting up ourselves so that we have more women on top of the value chain, whereby there's much more money to be made, as opposed to on the bottom of the value chain, whereby you're not making so much. Also, reskilling yourselves towards sectors that are globally or regionally in demand. And I said, I think this is an example I gave, taking advantage of that 30% that has been set aside by government to ensure that women are getting opportunities for government procurement. So that is the end of my presentation. I think I will invite questions, if any. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rose, for that very elaborate and informative presentation. So I'll just generally speak to some of the issues that stood out for me during the presentation. So I'll go to the government interventions that have been put in place to cushion traders generally, and in some cases specifically women traders. So we see the government introducing so many fiscal and monetary measures to cushion not specifically traders, but generally the economy. So there's examples of reduction of corporate tax and minimum individual tax rates and other from 30% to 25%. There's also the reduction of VAT from 16% to 14%, just to mention a few of the many tax incentives that have been introduced by the government. I'll also mention the proposed policy solutions that have been highlighted by Ross during the presentation, just to uplift women traders who have been adversely affected by the pandemic. So we see proposals to ensure women have equal representation in the COVID-19 response planning and decision-making teams. Proposal to address the issue of unpaid care work by women, because this has actually been, the situation has been aggravated by the pandemic, much as it's always been there with us, but during this pandemic, we have seen women go more into or spend more time in unpaid care work. So proposals to address the issue of unpaid care work by the government. Then we have a proposal to have more gender-aware policy making, so that it's not just finding solutions during this pandemic, because like we mentioned, we know there'll be other pandemics, others are already here with us to add on top of COVID-19, and we know more will still come. So just generally having a gender-aware aware policies that will always address problems being faced by women, so that it doesn't have to be finding new solutions every time we have a new pandemic. So there's also a proposal to put cash on women's hands through programs that support women financially. Then lastly, I'll mention it's a good thing that Ross tried to also address the issue of not having to wait for the government, but sometimes to just take initiative on our own to ensure that we are doing something to protect ourselves. So there's a proposal for women to innovate and embrace new business practices. An example I could think about was the issue of digital trade and how women can start taking advantage of that and embracing the new platform of trade by moving more and more from physical trade to digital trade. There's also the proposal for women to join lobby groups so that they can have an enhanced voice in advocating for whatever needs or challenges that they are facing in trading. So like she had mentioned, the government doesn't rarely listens to individuals, so joining lobby groups will enhance their voices and their chances of having their issues addressed. There's also the issue of diversification from traditional women sectors to more resilient sectors, such as product value addition, so that they're not vulnerable all the time there's a pandemic. They're always finding themselves in sectors that are very vulnerable. So that's it, the summary from Rose's presentation. So thank you very much, Rose. We'll move on to the plenary session so that the presenters can get an opportunity to interact with the participants. So to take us through this is our programs coordinator, John Mutua. John, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Joanne, and to our panelists, Gloria and Rose. Again, thanks for those insights. I guess before we dive right into the plenary session, I think for me one profound issue that I've gathered from these two presentations is that looking at the presentation by Rose that focused more on some of the interventions that the government has put in place, I'm trying to link this, for instance, to the challenges that both Gloria and Rose have mentioned. The challenge in terms of the burden that women have experienced, for instance, the time use, basically, the fact that women are spending more time in childcare and other related unpaid care activities. If you look at these interventions, they are what is called either gender neutral or gender blind interventions. And so it tells, I mean, the profound thing for me is that there is need for government. Of course, this was a new thing, and of course, government had to get into some quick intervention to try and cushion and protect livelihoods. But what the profound thing for me is that the design of our policies and interventions should be informed, should be more gender aware. Given that, for instance, what Gloria mentioned is that the circles, based on their survey and the interaction with women traders, that circles are critical social safety net, but you do not see any interventions towards strengthening those networks. And then the other issue is the fact that women are spending more time in terms of helping in homeschooling and paid care, and again, you don't see any interventions that are specific or sensitive to those kind of to the fact that women are spending more time in such unpaid care and the like. So those are the two things that I note from the presentation, and maybe our two panelists could also weigh in on that during their plenary. Otherwise, I now welcome our participants to pose whatever questions they may have or make whatever comments they may have, and you can direct your comments or questions to the two panelists. From the chat box, I can see there's a question from Velma, so I think I'll just go straight to that. She mentioned that she likes the point of building networks among small-scale traders. I think this was mentioned by, I think, Gloria, if I'm not wrong. So our question is, how is the issue of capacity, stocks, and capability being handled? E.g., for instance, when a client requires more than what is available. Then the second part of it is that is the target to just dispose of stocks, and also should like to hear different perspectives on how we can sustain these good initiatives beyond the pandemic. For instance, that is as we transition to some kind of normalcy. So that's a question from Velma. So we'll have 2 rounds of questions. Do we have any other question from the participants? You can either use the icon, raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and pose your question to either of the 2 panelists. I think as we wait to see whether there are additional questions in the chat box, or maybe Gloria, you can go first, and I believe you've noted the Velma's question. And then Ron,
yes, thank you, John.
Yeah, on the issue of the fact that we have a couple of interventions, but they seem to be gender blind. Yes, some of them may push on women, whether it's women traders, but that aspect of designing policies that are gender sensitive is something that the government needs to put more effort in. Yeah, so that is somewhat lacking from the issue of the design of intervention. With the certain evidence. Yeah. So Gloria, is the question from Belma clear? If not, I can repeat it.
No, John, it's okay. I'll go ahead and respond. But maybe going back to the first issue you raised about... Hello, can you hear me?
We also have a second question. Gloria, are you there? So we have a second question from Anne Biruru. She would like to know, do we know why, our question is that, do we know why women fail to take advantage of the 30%? I guess this is about AG4, 30% set aside for procurement. Could it be because of lack of adequate information or business not being compliant? So this is actually directed to Rose. So Rose, you can take that up. Gloria?
Okay, thank you, John. I hope
Rose,
you can hear me.
John, Gloria is there. Please let her answer the question first. Gloria is there, so let her answer the question first. Gloria, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah, but maybe you disable your video for a bit. So I'll just go back to something John raised as he was doing the summary around unpaid care work. So obviously, as we all know, that's a very complex issue because it's there are many dimensions, including the cultural dynamics of it. However, Trademark has planned as part of our mainstream programming is to develop what we call safe spaces at each border location. And these spaces are simply a place where the women can leave their children while they are in the market or while they cross the border to source their commodities. So there are various other partners doing similar interventions. So we are trying to look at piloting some of this work at Busia, and then with the possibility of scale up to different border locations as we get funding for this. But the idea is at least to get that burden off her, because she's able to at least ensure her child is in a safe space and then continue with whatever economic activities she has. But we're also cognizant of the fact that some of these issues go way beyond just economic activity, but just to family issues, household issues that sometimes projects, of course, cannot get into that space. But in as far as we are able to support the cross-border traders, this is what we are going to do around the issue of childcare. So then in response to Velma's question, so initially, I'm talking about Trademark in this case, in terms of our programming, we were not really taking the direct approach of cooperatives. It was more bringing the women together, because initially they were very fragmented, not well structured. So the initial interventions focused on that, just giving structure, putting leadership in place, some basic governance modalities. But more and more we realize, of course, the issue of market access is becoming pertinent. And if you want to grow trade value, you must address that issue. So we are going now sectoral. Like I mentioned, I gave a scenario of the egg cluster at Busia. So we're going to focus more on the commodity clusters in that sense. So women who are trading fish are brought together. Women who are trading Irish potatoes are brought together. Women who are trading grain also have their own cooperative. In Uganda, they prefer to have mixed cooperatives, which is fine. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is build that value. So if, like we said, if the demand comes through, at least you're able to rally, to aggregate, which very often they can't do as a single, if they're trading singly. So that's really the model that we are following. But they also sell corporately. So because most of them are in the same commodity, you're able to determine your volumes and how much you're able to put out in the market. Even as you source, you have the confidence that I may not be able to come up with a ton of beans, but together we could do that. So that's really the cooperative model that we're following through. It works very well in Rwanda, and that's also because Rwanda has a very well structured and institutional support from the Rwanda Cooperative Alliance, which may not necessarily be the same in the different countries in East Africa. But we continue to build that capacity, and we want to do this at different borders. So Busia may be well structured now, but that may not be the case for Namanga and Taveta and Isibanya, which are the other borders Trademark is going to work at. I think the other question was beyond the pandemic. Yes, so definitely Trademark has as I mentioned briefly, designed this safe trade response, which is really it's addressing the issues that are, of emergency currently, what's being faced now. But we also have a core program that is going to respond beyond the emergency that is already running for women in trade. We have various partners across the region, but also we have a platform for women in business that's hosted at the EABC in Arusha. That's also looking at issues of supporting women in SMEs and primarily building, like I said, that digital presence and that ability to trade virtually or online. So those projects will continue running for the next 2 to 3 years, so that we build in. Of course, as a program, we've also had to rethink some of the strategies that we had initially designed to see, are they really fit for purpose? So we're going through that process, and that is why we're also doing a lot of research, just to ensure that eventually the program is suited for the reality that these businesses are facing. And so that's an ongoing strategy of adaptation based on the different sectors, because in some sectors, people will be able to bounce back faster, whereas in others, maybe not. So we'll have to take all those different nuances into consideration. And I didn't quite understand the second question about offloading stock, but maybe it speaks to the cooperative as well. They don't normally, because they don't have that much storage. So they don't normally, keep huge consignments of stock at any one point in time. It's more short-term consolidation to sell and then restock. So they don't normally have huge stocks, but because of the way it was very abrupt, the way the borders were closed and everything, so they had no opportunity to dispose of some of the stocks that they have, and that's why many of those who are selling perishable commodities obviously lost, but also others who had grain and everything that has also gone bad in the stores. So because this transaction happens on a daily basis, every single hour, or there's something happening, particularly the Busia border. So once that's disrupted, the ripple effect of that is quite significant. So that's why we're seeing scenarios of women having, stock going to waste. But ideally, in an ideal situation, they probably wouldn't have that much in store, because they build up and sell and then build up again and sell. I hope I've responded to the question. Thank you, John. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. Rono?
Okay, thank you, John. I'll take up on the issue of the 30% procurement. What I can say for now, there isn't, I'm not aware of a research that has gone into why this 30% is not being taken up by women and persons with disability. But maybe in my interactions and discussions and my readings and observations, I can just maybe give some insight on what I think. Well, possibly in terms of awareness, maybe the awareness has not been sufficient for the target market, which are these women and persons with disability. So I think it may be important that we have some form of coordinated awareness through government agencies to ensure that they are aware about, women are aware about this 30%, but I don't think awareness is the main problem. For me, I look at the main problem being perception, whereby there's this perception that for you to get a tender with a government agency, you must know somebody, you must give somebody something, So this perception makes most of these women in business not be very, very interested in doing business with government, because by nature, women are not risk takers. So for me, I think that perception is there, and for me, I'd just like to say that perception is not correct in all instances. The government agency that I work in, our processes are very transparent. In fact, we try to look for these women traders and these persons with disability. We really look for them. So not all, if people treat it that for me to get a government procurement, I must part with something or I must know somebody, then you deny yourself that opportunity just from that perception. Also, another reason is that a lot of women businesses are not formalized, and now when it comes to engaging with the government, you need to be an entity. You need to have been registered. You need to have a business license. So you'll find a lot of women are offering these very good services or goods that the government can purchase, but they have not formalized their businesses. Some of them also lack capacity to service some of these tenders. You'll find you'll even give that woman the tender, but they do not have the capacity to service or to offer that service in terms of maybe the caliber of staff, in terms of financing. They might not have that, and that's one of the reasons I also think that is preventing them from taking this up. And some of them who have even been given the opportunity to take up this or been given those tenders, successfully gone through the process and been given, the delivery, you find the quality of what they deliver is so low to the point of some of them end up being blacklisted and they cannot be able to supply again. So that is one of the issues also that I'm seeing that is affecting women from taking up this opportunity. And what I can say that what has happened now, the government performance contracting cycle has incorporated this issue of the 30%, whereby government institutions must ensure that 30% of their budget goes towards women and persons with disability. So with this being put in our performance contracting tools and mechanism, then it means as institutions, we have to go out there and create awareness. We have to go out there and, show women that it is possible and show, persons with disability. It's very hard to be given a target of employing a person with disability, because if that person doesn't apply for that job, then how will you give them the job? And most of the time we don't get these people. They don't apply for these positions. So I think for me, that would be my response for that. I would like to respond on the issue of the good progress that has been made on issues of trade facilitation. Are they going to change it after the pandemic? What I can just say is that the automations that have been done, or the trade improvements that have been done or currently being done, I think we are going to endeavor to ensure that they are permanent. We would not want to automate processes and then after the pandemic we say now things have gone back to normal. We go back to the manual way, because automation leads to efficiencies. So as Kentrade being a trade facilitator in this country, we are looking at ensuring that whatever positive changes that have come as a result of this COVID pandemic, we are going to sustain them. Thank you. I think you're talking to yourself, John.
I think you're muted. Your mic.
Oh, yeah. So thanks. I've unmuted. No, what I was saying is I'd seen Gloria's hand up, so I don't know whether you hit the icon by mistake or you wanted to make some intervention.
Yes, no, just adding to what Rose said, I think a lot of the challenges around that, the procurement opportunity is perception, but also clearly there are capacity issues there. And one of the feedback also we received from some of the women SMEs is, I think there is room also to simplify some of that process. I think many of these enterprises give up even in the process of application, even before they get to the actual, competitive bidding. So I think there's still an opportunity to do that. And actually, under one of our projects, as I indicated, under the Women in Business platform, East African Women in Business platform, we're going to look into this issue in more depth to really understand where exactly is this stuck. Because it's not just in Kenya, even in Tanzania and Rwanda, the uptake is not as it should. And we're hearing stories that actually, in the end, proposals come in, but really the person behind the proposal is actually a male. They're not the actual business. So they front the women. And that defeats the purpose of this policy. So we're going to sort of kick off a study in the next few months to sort of get a deep dive and figure out exactly where this issue is locked and possibly design some advocacy or capacity building to respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that addition on AGPO and on the issue of low uptake of AGPO by women. So we have the second and final round of question and answer. Again, this is open to our participants. Do we have any question or comment? I don't see any from the chat box. Let's see. There is something. Joanne Onyango has made some has noted some comment, and it's in relation to the opportunity. She mentioned that there's an opportunity for a study on AGPO to establish the issues around that, and some of these things have been discussed by both Rono and Gloria, and of course there are some studies that have been done, but not necessarily elaborate evaluation of achievements of the AGPO program. I've not come across any tracer studies, but I've come across some assessments here and there on the AGPO. But no doubt there's obviously an opportunity for further study and work around that, just to try and unlock the hurdles that making women not take up the opportunities that have been provided in there. Oh, sorry, and then before a comment, Joanne has a question. But it's in relation to, she's asking whether we have any programs in place to enable women take up this opportunity, the 30% procurement, the pre-serve of for women, youth, and persons living with disability. So, Rono, whether you are aware of any programs in place to enable this or facilitate this requirement, maybe you can respond to that.
Okay, thank you, John. As I think I had responded to it by saying that the government has a performance contracting mechanism.
Okay.
Has given basic guidelines that every institution must include the issue of 30% in their performance contract, which, like for example, Kentrade, we sign it with our parent ministry, National Treasury, and at the end of the year we must have that 30% of uptake. So what happens now as a government institution, we ensure that there is awareness, we ensure that we advocate, we ensure in all our sensitization and engagement, stakeholder engagement forums, we educate on this. We have specific days whereby we call on, we work with associations and ensure that we bring together women and explain to them the complex process. I know, I think Gloria is very right that some of the processes are a bit complex. The public procurement process can be a bit complex, but we also now go ahead and demystify and take them through the process step by step. In some instances, there's also the facilitation whereby if you have gotten a tender and you do not have the amount of money to start the tender, you can be able to ask for a down payment of the value of the tender. Then it can be able to facilitate you. So those are, and that is not something that is just for Kentrade alone. You'll find all government agencies have that in their performance contracting. So that has ensured that each government agency ensures that they are creating awareness and that they are ensuring that this 30% is taken up by women. But I also support what Gloria has said. We are now seeing fronts coming up whereby women, men-owned businesses are putting directors, they're just putting a name there of somebody who is not a main player, so it's not even, it's not a woman's own business. A woman has just been put there so that you can be able to circumvent that process, and that defeats the purpose of that policy, which was supposed to be empower women. So, and to prevent this now, it means that women need to come up, women need to take these opportunities so that these gaps are not filled by people who are fronting to be women-owned businesses and they are not.
Okay.
John, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Since I do not see any additional comment or question, so I would like to invite the two panelists, starting with Gloria, to make their final remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John and Rose and all those who joined this call. I think from me, what I think the biggest takeaway I have learned over this period is just the need for partnerships. I think now more than ever, none of us can go this alone. If we're ready to rebuild businesses and help people to recover, whether they are formal or informal, it will require collaboration with the government, collaboration with development partners like Trademark, collaboration with the private sector, banks, restructuring financing facilities. It is going to require really collaboration across the board, because this pandemic has hit every aspect of life. So it's not something you can address in isolation. In fact, if more than anything, it has shown us even more than ever how much interconnected and integrated the different aspects of our lives are. So I think, to me, it's a call for collaboration, both with private and non-private entities and government entities and development partners, just to come up with solutions or interventions that will really help to build economies back across. And I think the second thing I would say is, again, a lot of the sectoral approach will be necessary, because much as we've seen a common trend, I think some sectors have been more hard hit than others. So I think that we need to sort of understand exactly, if you're dealing with horticulture, how do you rebuild that value chain? If you're dealing with fish, what needs to be done? Some of the infrastructure investments we've had over the years, are they suitable? Can they work going forward? So I think a lot of soul searching and thinking through and adapting our different programs and policies to ensure that the response we have, or the response that we take, will make a difference, particularly to women, but to the whole business sector as a whole. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gloria, for that. Rono?
Thank you, John. For me, I've really learned a lot, and I think my biggest takeaway is what Gloria has said about the plan by Trademark East Africa to do a study on AGPO. I think that's really important, and also the study that they have done on how women have been affected by the pandemic, the women traders. So I think those two studies can be able to, when shared with the government agencies that are in charge of matters trade, and specifically women, specifically when it comes to trade and women, then informed by those studies, then policies can be tweaked, new policies can be introduced to ensure that the challenges that these women traders are facing are mitigated against. And just to parting short to say, pandemics happen once in a lifetime, or sometimes it doesn't happen in anybody's lifetime. There are people who have not seen a pandemic in their lifetimes. I guess us people, we were lucky to see a pandemic. I don't know if the next generation after this pandemic will be able to see another one. So maybe there were instances whereby the government was not very prepared to react to it, but it has been a lesson. It has been a lesson learned for most government institutions, and most of us are even putting in place our business continuity plans. Most of us are now putting in place measures to mitigate if something else happens like this again in future, then we are going to be better prepared in terms of even how we respond. So I think that would be my parting shot, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this.
So yeah, so thanks a lot to both of you, Gloria and Rono. Also, you actually know that Ron is actually one of our, is a member, actually a program advisory committee member of the Trade and Development Program, and so we are indeed grateful for your participation and sharing, for sparing time to share your insights on this, as well as the participant taking their time to contribute to this conversation. So thanks a lot. And so what we'll do is Joanne will actually synthesize some of the discussion and salient issues that have come out of this webinar into some bulletin that we'll use for further engagement